Hello and welcome back, everybody. Something seems delayed. Welcome back, everybody, to GPS Live for the week of March 29th, 2024. I'm Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we are so excited to have you back with us. And I just realized that none of my lights are on in my room, and that's why it feels so dark in here. There we go. So we are so excited. It's so good to see you too, Jonathan. We are back with more news, some more updates to last week's stories that we talked about. And we are very excited to be here. It is actually as we looked around for news this week, we realized that a lot of stuff that we were seeing was just kind of updates about other stories that have already been out there for a while and that we didn't feel like talking about. So we mined the depths and found some new things. But before we dive into those and dive into anything else, we want to say thank you for joining us. If you're here live, go ahead and let us know where you're coming in from, so that we can kind of get a better understanding of where folks are watching from and what kind of things you're interested in, and also just comment on the stories as we're talking. We love seeing that interaction from you. But also, very importantly, we have to say that the views and opinions expressed by Jonathan and myself are our own. They do not necessarily reflect GuidePoint Security's actual opinions. These are just the things that we're saying as we are two guys talking about cybersecurity, right? So, Jonathan, how's your week been?
It's been crazy busy, but it is quite lovely here down in Florida. The weather is quite nice. It is chill. I had an opportunity to go camping over the weekend. It's one of my favorite non-computer related activities. That's right. You should get out of the house every once in a while.
It's good to see the sun and touch nature once in a while.
Tristan, how was your week?
My week's been pretty all right. You know, we've been cranking out some really interesting stuff over on the GuidePoint Security blog. We've had some really interesting stories going up. A really interesting one that went up this week was about exploiting flaws in SCCM to gain privilege and take over accounts. So very interesting stuff from our threat and attack simulation team that they put out. And we've got some other stuff in the pipeline too that's really cool. So we've been working a lot on that. But we've got some good updates to start off with this time around. So let's start off by just talking about Pwn2Own. Last week we covered this. So Jonathan, what happened last week?
Well, Pwn2Own was this really big competition where a lot of the big brands that we know and love, Microsoft, Apple, even Tesla, get involved in to offer up massive cash prizes for people that can, show some crazy bugs in their stuff. And of course, the big challenge here is not just discovering the bug and getting paid, but it leaves these developers with a bit of a time limit to get this stuff solved before the rest of the internet is made known how it works.
Exactly. So with Pwn2Own, I believe it's a 90-day window from the time that the competition ends and you've paid out for these bugs that have been discovered to the time that you have to fix them. So when you look at something like ethical hacking and why is my brain suddenly losing the term that I'm trying to pull?
It's responsible disclosure. And bug bounties.
There we go. Responsible disclosure is what I was trying to pull. Right. Very often you work with these companies and they want the appropriate amount of time to fix these bugs that are discovered. And sometimes that can be an extremely extended window depending on the bug that was found. But with Pwn2Own, you just get 90 days. It doesn't matter what bug was found or how hard it's going to be to fix. You've got 90 days to get cracking before they are allowed to release that research. And so importantly, a couple major things that were discovered had to do with Google Chrome and Mozilla Firefox, and some bugs that were pretty hefty. And I think paid out quite a bit of money. I should have pulled up the actual stats that those ones pulled before we started, but both Chrome and Firefox have already updated to fix those bugs. We've dropped a couple links to stories about those in the chat. But for Google Chrome specifically, there was a high severity type confusion weakness in WebAssembly that was demonstrated on the first day of Pwn2Own. So I feel like this guy came ready with this exactly ready to go and off the bat. It allowed for some remote code execution and some crafted HTML to target Chrome and Edge. And then on the second day of Pwn to Own, another bug was disclosed, and that one has also been taken care of already by Google.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, for all things considered, a little over a week to go from submitted research and proof of concept to patch and test and distribution is really impressive. And so kudos to the development teams over at Chromium and development teams over at Mozilla for getting the information out to the public so quickly so that they can patch against these wildly successful exploits. And remember, Pwn to Own isn't just, hey, I found a potential bug. This is watch me run an executable on your local machine, right? We are talking, in these exercises, just for fun, what most of them are able to do is they are able to launch Calculator. This is just kind of the de facto, look what I can do. If I can launch calc.exe on a Windows system, that means I've successfully been able to do remote code execution from the browser to launch a native application. And so these are the most hardcore, fully executable kind of vulnerabilities, not just little tip of the iceberg stuff. And so it's taken very seriously, and it is, as you can tell, patched and distributed very seriously and quickly.
Yeah, and I just clicked into a story specifically about the bugs in Firefox. And so one of them was let attackers access a JavaScript object that was out of bounds. And once they were able to do that, they were able to traverse across and escape the sandbox so that they could open up a calculator, like you said. The thing that is kind of wild about this, right, is that the researcher who explicitly did this one's Manfred Paul earned $100,000 for this for this bug alone. Right. These are really incredible events when they are put on, because the profit incentive to come in and say, hey, I'm going to find something that is actually incredibly severe, right, and take that cash home is incredibly high. And the high pressure turnaround time, right? The interesting thing about this is that you'll read some of these articles and it'll often say that, like, some of these developers will take their time because they have 90 days. Right. Everything is laid bare for them. It's shown to them. Here's exactly how I did this. They get detailed reports on all of that so they can go start fixing things. But Mozilla and Google both decided to just turn these around instantly. Mozilla actually patched, I believe, same day. So it was revealed at Pwn to Own, and later that day, Mozilla was like, yeah, we took care of that one. Like, done. And Google Chrome took 5 days to take care of this. And so with some of these other bugs, right, they will take their time. They will test these security patches, but these flaws were severe enough that both Google and Mozilla deemed it necessary to patch immediately, as soon as possible. So that's some great news coming out of something like Pwn to Own. We love to see stuff like that. I'd be really curious to see what some of the things that were found regarding like Tesla and other things, other platforms were, because those are much larger, going to be much harder to fix, right? Because those are systems that are integrated throughout a car. So very curious to see how long those take and when patches will come out for those.
But that's not really, it as far as some of the crazy stuff going on this week. But we do appreciate some good news. We did a little shift up, right? We threw it right at the beginning at you. But as far as kind of leading into some of our major stories for this week, I wanted to feature a story coming up here called Darkula, which is a spinoff of Dracula. But what's interesting about this article coming to us from Bleeping Computer talks about phishing now starting to utilize those native texting platforms. Historically, ways that you could compromise people is get them off of one platform, maybe like a platform like Facebook or eBay, and get them to go to Telegram or WhatsApp or something kind of outside of the security purview. Well, in this case, phishing services, especially this one like Darkula, is using native platforms like Android's RCS and iPhone's iMessage to send encrypted messages so that your cell phone carrier is no longer filtering these out or even has visibility into them. SMS is kind of going to the wayside now when it comes to smishing.
Yeah. So, right, historically, like you said, trying to get people off of these major platforms like Facebook or eBay messaging or wherever, right, and move them somewhere else. No one is a stranger to getting a risky SMS right, an SMS text.
I'm texting you right now.
Yep. That, you know, they always say something like, hey, your package has been delayed or something, and they direct you to a weird random website. And it was pretty easy to spot them. I still get screenshots all the time from friends, family, and others asking, hey, is this legitimate? And it's pretty easy to tell right off the bat for someone who is familiar with those techniques, right? But what we're seeing now with Darkula specifically is that they're moving off of those traditional methods like SMS, and into what's called RCS, Rich Communication Services, which is a profile that Google has been pushing very much in the last few years. So it was built years ago as a replacement for SMS and MMS, right? So it was like, hey, we have higher bandwidth available to us now. We have better technology around compression and messaging and encryption. So it was built to replace SMS and MMS as separate standards, and bring that kind of iMessage style functionality to messaging across all phones. Now, Apple has been hesitant to adopt that, but news is that will be adopting it this fall. They should be rolling RCS support out in iMessage.
We shall see.
We shall see. But Darkula doesn't just target RCS; it also targets iMessage. And the problem with this, the complication that it introduces, is that both RCS and iMessage are marketed as more secure, safer methods of messaging because they do end-to-end encryption between devices. And what that means is that traditional means of filtering out spam text messages that cell providers would do don't work anymore because that message is encrypted from the phone that sent it all the way to the other side. So it's much harder now for networks to detect these messages, and these are arriving to people through what they believe to be a trusted format.
Yeah. And, this new phishing as a service isn't just using some more of these native secure messaging platforms instead of third-party ones. They're doubling down on some of the other phishing aspects of it too. Right. There's over 20,000 websites behind this phishing as a service. There's 20,000 domains of fake login pages for your most popular websites on the internet. And the biggest thing here that I'm seeing as far as like a differentiator is that these websites are responsive. They're making them actually complex and feel and look dynamic like the real thing. Traditionally, phishing websites are just copy paste of the HTML. It's just meant to look the same from maybe like a mile-long glance. But what's happening is Darkula is employing modern languages like JavaScript, React, and Angular, and they're running it in containerized environments to do scalability, and offering a rich experience in their phishing websites, so that when a page transforms and is dynamic with the login, it looks and feels just the same as the real thing. And this is adding a second kind of challenge when it comes to identifying these phishing messages coming in. So not just, bypassing traditional filters, but doubling down and offering up websites that look and feel like the real thing, and are meeting kind of all of those initial checks.
Yep. So it uses, excuse me. So basically when you're using Darkula, you select the brand that you want to impersonate out of these, 200 different templates that they have, these 20,000 domains that they control, but specifically 200 templates. And you can also filter it down to things like local languages, so that everything on the pages is correct and local to the person who's being targeted. You select that brand to impersonate, and then you just run some setup scripts that install the corresponding websites that you have selected through and like a management dashboard directly into a Docker environment. And then the sites are developed in React, and you can start sending out your messages from there. So it's typically using .top or .com top level domains to host. It's also, I think if I'm reading this correctly in the article, about a third of these are backed by Cloudflare. So these are even appearing to be more legitimate than the standard sites that you would think of. But yeah, so this is a real advancement in the way that phishing is being conducted, and this is just an as a service offering. So you can buy into this and immediately start sending out these messages. Now, some of the things that this article on Bleeping Computer does call out, right, is like we talked about already, abandoning SMS and moving just to RCS and iMessage to avoid things like filtering that a network might do to try and prevent these kinds of spam messages from getting through. But there are other restrictions, right? Like iMessage Apple will block accounts from iMessage that are sending too many messages too quickly. So RCS also has some controls and protections around that. But that's not going to stop, people who are determined to do this. They're just going to set up a farm where they have multiple devices and they split up that workload through all of them so that those messages can get through. But interestingly, another one that they call out in here is that iMessage specifically will not let a link be clickable unless you have replied to the message. So if it's a new number that you've never received a message for, it sends you a link. They won't let you click that link unless you reply back to the message. So the message itself is crafted to just say, hey, please reply with like yes or one to acknowledge that you've received this message. And it even has instructions in there. If you still can't click the link, exit the message and come back. And that will allow you to click it. So they're walking you through this process. Now, if I were to receive a message like that, right, that's walking me through specific steps to actually access something, that would set off alarm bells for me. But for your typical consumer, that probably actually just looks like good customer care, right? They're just helping me through this, because these, again, messages appear to be legitimate and coming from legitimate sources because they are coming through RCS and iMessage.
Yeah, and so the kind of towards the end of the article, there is a little bit of kind of a footnote that talks about, at this point, anything coming into your phone, text message, SMS, whether for those iPhone players out there, green or blue, you really should scrutinize and think twice about what's going on here, because clicking any URLs, especially that seems suspicious, especially if the sender is not recognized. iMessage is already putting in a lot of effort, like you said, to prevent links from being clickable that are not part of an active conversation. And even that flag warning, the sender is not in your contact list. These are a couple things that you should be able to recognize immediately, especially now that you're aware of it. Share this with your community, but please be extra vigilant regardless of the platform or the app. At this point, threat actors are going to continue to experiment with different delivery methods and different ways of communicating their social engineering techniques to get you to click, fulfill, visit, fill out, steal, whatever it may be. And so it's just, we do have a lot of security measures in place, but they're making it even easier for the threat actors by providing some crazy extra steps.
Yeah. So, but this isn't the only phishing story that we've got for this week. We actually have some more going on. So there's a new multi-factor authentication bypass phishing technique that is making the rounds. Jonathan also found this one. Jonathan found the stories for this week. Anything that I found, I was like, nope, this just isn't interesting. So what's going on with this one?
So we're all familiar with the fact that multi-factor, or even at least two-factor authentication, is going to be way better than just a username and password. So the challenge now becomes is how do we fish out that additional multi-factor component? And so there's a new tool hitting the scene. It is coming out called Tycoon 2FA. And it's been around for quite a few months now. But the idea is okay, so everybody's starting to use multi-factor. We get it. You need to get either that 6-digit PIN, some kind of click-through, some kind of validation. And this tool is targeted at stealing that multiple factor outside of your standard credentials. Usually that stuff is very time-based, very limited, very hyper-focused on how you're receiving it or how you're involved in that process. But does not mean by any means that a wedge can't be shoved right in the middle to intercept all of those things that are happening.
Yeah. So what's happening with this one, and this is actually we just talked about a story, I believe last week. Was it last week or the week before? We talked about the ways that attackers were taking over Teslas by adding their own keys to the car, their own digital keys to the car, because the system only required that the real key be within a certain range of the car for you to be able to add something. And so they were setting up fake websites or fake Wi-Fi access points, directing people to a Tesla login page and then capturing their multi-factor authentication and then logging into their account. This works much the same way. So just like the Darkula package that came with a pre-populated selection of URLs and companies to impersonate, Tycoon 2FA also does this. So it comes with, I think it says here, 1,100 domains that can be utilized. And the way that this works is a person is targeted to log into a page. It brings them to a fake login page, but there's a proxy in the middle of this interaction. So as they are going to that fake login page, the proxy is actually accessing the real login page on the back end. And so every credential that you put into the fake page gets relayed to the real login page that the proxy is running. So then when you put in your multi-factor authentication attempt, it automatically relays that to the page, and it gets through that login. But also what it's doing then is it's saving all of those session cookies immediately within the proxy so that it can bypass multi-factor authentication the next time around. So they can gain some persistent access to this system. That is, of course, until you maybe revoke access to all logins. But, I can count on one hand the number of people I know who regularly go in and click like log out all other devices, which is actually, it's not a bad thing to do if you have a single device you're using most often. But then they can just gain access to these systems whenever they want.
Yeah. Now, this is not necessarily a new technique. This is just particular to this new tool. But what's happening is the concept of targeting that session or intercepting the communications or watching even that authentication happen with the multi-factor. This has been happening for a long time. We see this in both 365 and Google-based account sessions. And that is why we're seeing this kind of move on the internet towards stuff like passkey or hardware-based tokens or anything that is essentially going to lock devices themselves to the identities, right? Because right now, multi-factor in its traditional form, especially PIN-based and things of that nature, can still be accessed anywhere in the world. They're not necessarily focused on the laptop or the cell phone or something that's physically owned by an individual. And so it is encouraged to start seeking out some of those new modern passwordless capabilities like passkey and similar to help prevent this kind of problem. Now, not everybody's prepared or ready or has the systems and hardware to support this yet, but we are very well aware as far as security threat and moving in the right direction. So this is definitely targeting a lot of people that still haven't fully adopted this new security, which again, can be difficult. It is not as simple as a username and password and maybe a 6-digit PIN, that's text message to you. We're just now, you're having people getting used to the fact that there's this thing that you have to do in conjunction, let alone have a device that is wholly owned by you and locked to your identity.
Yeah. Actually speaking of this, a few weeks ago, I was going to log into a site and it texted me an MFA code. And interestingly, it was actually only 5 digits was the standard that they were using, which was interesting enough. This is the first time I was ever logging into this new service, by the way. So it was really interesting. I was like, oh, okay, so 5, a little less secure, but probably still within parameters. But the code that I got specifically was just 11111. which is incredibly strange for a random
There's
system
a
to give you.
1 in 100,000 chance.
Yeah, it was incredibly strange to get an all ones code. And it definitely made me do a double take. I was like, all right, what am I actually logging into here? Where is this coming from? And so I immediately like closed out of everything, deleted all of my cookies, moved to a different device, tried to log in on that, see like what kind of code I would get. But yeah, it is really interesting to see. And there's actually a very detailed breakdown from Bleeping Computer. They link out to the Sequoia analysts who found this, and there is a breakdown graph of what is actually happening here. Most interestingly to me is that at the end, once they have secured your login information and gone through that 2FA, they actually do direct you back to the real website. They send you back there fully logged in, so that everything looks good. But we have one final story to cover in the last few minutes that we have. And this one may not seem as directly impactful to organizational cybersecurity than personal, but I think actually there is some play here. So the largest Discord bot platform, Top.gg, has been compromised, and some poisoned repositories have been uploaded there. Now, if you're not familiar with this, right, Discord is like your typical messaging service, and it's very heavily utilized in nerd and gaming communities, and plenty of others. But like let's be honest, that's the real draw here for Discord. A lot of people use it to moderate their own communities and have their fans interact. But to do that, they employ the use of bots. So people will download these bot repositories, run them through Python, and set them up on their machines locally. And that bot then can moderate that community for them. It can remove certain words from messages. It can, send automatic replies to people about certain things. There's a whole host of functionality that can be done through these bots. It's really pretty limitless. But so Top.gg is the largest repository of bots that you can find for Discord. And it's searchable, and you can go through and look for things that are very interesting. And what's happened here is one group in particular, this threat actor has been kind of hijacking GitHub accounts and distributing malicious Python packages for quite a while. But what they've done specifically is they were able to access and take over one of the top administrators of Top.gg, and then gain access to their GitHub repository for the website itself, and start uploading their own poison packages to that. It is pretty interesting what they have done. What they've done here is that they put their own Python packages at a mirror called pypyhosted.org, which is just typo squatting for the domain Python hosted. And then they would upload their own things there. And as they gained access to these repositories for these other bots, they would start redirecting pieces of that bot to their own repository on pypyhosted.org. Now, this is really just a way to get malware onto a machine, because you have to download these, you have to execute the setup programs for these bots. In a lot of cases, you have to learn some basic Python and execute that as well, and put in all of your options. But specifically, once this is up and running, it downloads malware to that target user's machine, and it starts doing a lot of different things. Like, it looks for browser data so that it can gain session cookies, it can gain access to your logins, Discord related directories, so it can gain access to anything that you have for Discord tokens and APIs, Instagram, Telegram, file stealers, obviously accessing cryptocurrency wallets, captures keystrokes and saves them, and then exfiltrates all of that data out back to the original host. And what I think is interesting here from an organizational perspective is, one, you might have people who are running Discord locally on their on their work machines just so they can keep in touch with people, right? You want to make sure that they are not able to access and run things like these Discord bots, because they're often set up as small containers, small Python packages that they run in the background. But two, bots are not exclusive to Discord, right? They are also available for Slack. And so if you have people in your organization who have the ability to run their own local infrastructure for bots in Slack, maybe things that are outside of the original Slack package repositories, you are open to just exactly the same kind of attack. So you have to be monitoring these communication tools that you're using in your environment, like Slack, where things can be added in the interest of efficiency that may be doing other things.
Yeah. My quick takeaway from this, because I know we're at the top of the hour here, is basically just because it's on GitHub and just because it's coming from the official source still doesn't mean that it's safe and secure, because threat actors are targeting the admins, owners, moderators, and contributors of a lot of these large packages that are found on GitHub. And in this case, was able to compromise one of these admins, just change the domain name of one of the little dependencies from Python to PyPy, which seems completely innocent. Again, I would have completely missed it if I didn't know what I was looking for. And now when people are downloading these applications and running them on their computers, they are essentially adding malware to their systems. And so it is really critical to be extra safe, extra secure. And I don't think there's a whole lot you could have really done about this one. I know GitHub is implementing a lot of secure code functionality these days, but this is one of those cases where you had to follow a URL that was mentioned on an include and see where it goes from there, and make sure that all of your pips and your Ruby gems and all the other things that are dependencies these days are safe. And that is it is an astronomical task, and it really took advantage of this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a supply chain attack on smaller scale and very targeted towards
going after those gamer nerds.
But hey, when gamer nerds probably make up most of your IT and security teams, you got to be careful. So with that brings us to the end of GPS Live for March 29th. Thank you so much for joining us. If you've been watching live, obviously, thank you so much. But if you're watching this on demand, we also really appreciate you coming back to take a look at what we had to say. Let us know what your thoughts are. If you find any stories this week that you find interesting, you can drop them in the comments, and we will take a look at them to see if it's something that we can cover next time around. Until then, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you next time.